two MPs, one Labour, one Conservative, the Shadow Schools Minister for Labour, Mike Cain, and Jacob Rees-Mogg from the Conservatives. You were tipped as a speaker at one stage, weren't you, a future speaker? Anyway, what's the mood of Conservative MPs given the result? How would you describe it?
Since the 1922 committee meeting last night, the mood of Tory MPs is really very positive. That Theresa May's performance yesterday was very strong, and today people really want to get behind her, support her and back her and get the government up and running.
What do you think of what Mr Corbyn said about how this might be a very short parliament, another election soon?
It's one of politicians and journalists' favourite sports, speculating about when the next election will be, and we thought all the fun of that was taken away by the Fixed Term Parliament Act, but it's back. I'd note that Attlee only managed 1 year with a small majority, but that Harold Wilson and Callaghan managed almost the whole of the 5-year period with a small majority. So sometimes you can go the whole time, sometimes you can't.
Mike Cain, what's your prediction about how long this Parliament's going to last? How do you see the months ahead?
Well, we saw the re-election of John Bercow today. I think the government would have dearly loved at one stage to have moved against him, but they were powerless to do so. And we saw a Prime Minister with all authority ebbed and gone away from her, unlike what Jacob was saying about the Wilson and Callaghan administrations, particularly Wilson. He was on the op, and you saw that upbeat mood today on the Labour benches.
Very different. I mean, I can remember lots of Prime Minister's questions where Labour MPs have sat on their hands, sat there with glum faces. A lot of humble pie being eaten by Labour MPs in the tea room, is there?
Well, I think what you saw was the party come together, particularly after the second leadership election, and you just saw one of the best campaigns of modern political history, which, you know, produced a result that was absolutely unexpected, let alone 6 months ago, let alone 4 weeks ago. And you see now Labour back in the game, on the ascendancy, and who knows what will happen over the next few days.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, what are the really tricky problems facing Theresa May and the Conservative government? Brexit, I guess, is one. What do you see as the main challenges and the difficulties for Theresa May and the government now?
Within Parliament, I think Brexit is relatively straightforward because the Great Repeal Bill is contingent on the referendum result. What will be hard will be getting routine legislation through, and we'll be getting every detail of budgets through, and therefore the government will have to be very cautious about any legislative programme that it has. What it does as an executive doesn't need parliamentary consent, will be as straightforward as it normally is, but anything that requires legislation, other than, as I say, the Great Repeal Bill, is going to be hard.
The first time MPs will get a chance to vote, of course, will be on the Queen's speech. What's Labour's approach going to be on the Queen's speech? Mr Corbyn's talking about getting the other parties to come together. What chances are of that, do you think, of a combined Labour, SNP and other parties joining together to either to put forward an alternative Queen's speech or vote the government's speech down?
Well, the first thing I'd say, John, we're 5 days after a general election with no sign of a government being formed and no end in sight of when a government will be formed. We don't know if we'll even be back next week for a Queen's speech yet or not. And at the moment, Labour sticking to its manifesto and not conducting negotiations with other parties. It'll be up to the Prime Minister to see if she can form a government, and as of yet there's been no sign of that.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, David Davis.
Because constitutionally it's not accurate. The government simply continues. That there has been no change of Prime Minister. An election does not mean the change of government. The government is not reappointed. The old government remains in office. So it's wrong to say there's been no formation of a government. The Queen's government is being carried on as usual.
Right, my question was going to be, David Davis and others have conceded that various bits of the Conservative manifesto are going to be dropped. Which bits of the Tory manifesto would you like to see dropped?
Well, I think it's a statement of the obvious that some bits will be dropped. I think the not fully thought through social care policy will be dropped. I expect the removal of the fuel allowance will be at least suspended or altered from what it would have been. I have a nasty feeling we'll find it much harder to get through the repeal of the vicious section of a bill on press freedom that we were going to do, because the Labour Party quite likes bashing our free press, and the House of Lords does too. So there'll be some very good things that we'll probably lose, as well as some things that weren't necessarily fully thought through.
What are the things that Labour will be demanding are dropped from the government's programme?
Well, the biggest vanity project for the Prime Minister's, which is a personal project for her, was grammar schools. She's reappointed Justine Greening, who marginally won her seat in Putney, and she's no fan of grammar schools. So she's got cabinet ministers now and the backbenchers calling the shots. She's in office but out of power.
What would you like to see happen to the grammar schools policy?
Well, as it happens, I support the grammar schools policy, but I thought it was a distraction in the election debate because it'll be a very small number of schools, even if it happens. I doubt there is now a majority to get grammar schools through, and you have to face political reality. Prime Ministers and Chief Whips always need to be able to count. They can't get their business through if they don't have a majority, and there's no point in using political capital up on things that simply won't get through Parliament. But that doesn't mean we can't have a government that is doing all sorts of other important things, ensuring that the Academies programme continues to roll out, which has been improving standards dramatically across the country. I'm sure you remember from the campaign 1.8 million more children in schools that are now good or outstanding thanks to academisation. So there's lots of good stuff that can carry on, and we can ignore the sideshows.
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2014-15, 183,000 economic migrants came from the European Union, none of whom would be deterred by anything we've heard so far. Ever closer union may be taken out of the preamble, but it remains in the essential text of all of the treaties. On protecting the euro out, all that will happen is that there will be a discussion, and there are plenty of discussions in the European Union. And on competitiveness, that's been part of the European Union's own ambition since the Lisbon Agenda of 1999. The thin gruel has been further watered down, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend has a fortnight, I think, in which to salvage his reputation as a negotiator.
My honourable friend is extremely articulate and always speaks very powerfully, but let me just take two of the points that he makes and say why I think actually he's got this wrong. First of all, the principles that will be legally binding in terms of how currencies other than the euro are treated, that is a real advance. That means, for instance, never again can the European Union suggest that you can only have the clearance of euros in Eurozone countries. That would have been disastrous for our financial services industry. So I've secured that. They can't even promote that again. And that's so important because, of course, if we weren't in the European Union, we wouldn't have that protection at all. They could change that rule like that. And I think he doesn't understand the power of the principles of no discrimination, no disadvantage, and no cost, so we can't be forced to bail out Eurozone countries, as we nearly were last summer. That is powerful. And on ever closer union, I would encourage him to look at section C, page 9 of these documents, where it says the references to an ever closer union do not offer a base for extending the scope of any provision of the treaties. Now, as I've said, as far as I can remember, and I was advising a minister when we had the Maastricht debates, and I sat through watching Lisbon and Nice and Amsterdam and the rest, this has never been set out that way. This means you can't use ever closer union to drive a process of integration. Now, if we've got in this House the protection that we have to have a referendum if any minister ever suggests we sign up to another treaty that passes power, protection 1, and we've got this, we're well on our way to saying that our different sort of membership of the EU is not only safeguarded, but it's being extended, because not only are we out of the euro, out of Schengen, but we're also out of ever closer union too.
And I'm glad to say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the requirement not to be rude about judges only applies to judges in this country. It does not apply to judges in the European Union. So let me, Mr. Deputy Speaker, be rude about them. Let me indulge in the floxy-knocking nihilopilification of judges of the European Union. But they were so shocked by the loss, they were so confident that their own virtuous views would prevail, and that people like us, the Daily Express contingent, as you might like to call us, were so antediluvian that we couldn't possibly win. So when they lost, they were horrified, and they were desperately upset by this, and they haven't recovered from that. And so every negative aspect they can put on Brexit, they put with glee, when in fact things have gone really well. All the doom and gloom hasn't happened. The economy is doing well, employment is at an all-time high. It's a success story so far, when they were predicting imminent and immediate disaster. And they can't quite bear the fact that people as clever as them have turned out to be wrong, and people as stupid as me have turned out to be right. So I think we should be quite pleased that they're in such a difficulty, but we should hold them to account because the BBC is meant to be impartial.
Sprang up around former Labour leader Ed Miliband. But this week it's been suggested that there's a new, unlikely political star of social media. Here's Ellie Price.
What greater pleasure can there be for a true-born Englishman or true-born Englishwoman to listen to our own national anthem? Now, Mr. Speaker, or my right honourable friend, the member for Buckingham, as he now is, has a reputation for being a moderniser. This is a word I use with some caution. Let me indulge in the floxy-knocky-nihilopilification of judges of the European Union.
There are times when a nation needs a hero, an icon on whom we can all depend.
I've heard people say...
Now might not be one of those times, but there seems to be loads of people at the moment who just really love Jacob Rees-Mogg. Maybe it's because he himself posts to social media, even when he's faced with setbacks. Maybe it's because he has such a strong and youthful campaign team behind him. And maybe it's because he seems to have cross-party support. Whatever it is, the Rees-Mogg has inspired a generation of photoshoppers and meme creators on the internet, and he gets everywhere. So much so that someone's even interviewed him about what he thinks of these memes, and that's been really popular.
I always think it's important to sit comfortably in the chamber, particularly if you're in there for a long time.
And it doesn't stop there. There's even a campaign to make him PM. What is it about Jacob Rees-Mogg that you love so much?
I think it's because he's a little bit eccentric. He doesn't take himself so seriously.
So how many people have signed up to the campaign?
So we have just over 12,000 signatures so far, and 4,500 people have liked us on Facebook.
Gosh, that's a lot of Rees-Mogg love.
Yeah, it is, and I've got to say I'm actually surprised that we've got this big in such a short period of time.
I feel a change.
His support isn't just the grassroots of his power base in North East Somerset, but, as his local paper once said, he's got Mogmentum.
Can't get enough of your love, baby.
So is there love for Mogg in the studio?
There's absolutely massive love for Jacob. I've worked with...